And have you ever thought about like where it is that you thrive? Like situations, circumstances, maybe it's a type of job or you're around a certain group of people. Like you feel like you're at your very best. It's like the best you. Like for me, I think, and again, it's kind of weird to say, I think this is it. And some people might go, no, we've been with you there. And that is not true. I feel like I thrive in moments where there's like a crisis, where there's chaos, where everything's going crazy. Like I feel like in those moments, like my blood starts going. Like I lean into those moments where you need a quick decision, and we have to do that, and we can't just stand still. We've got to move. I feel like I do well in those places, and that's where I get excited. We were at the Frio River several years ago, and we had us and another family had rented a house and just hanging out for a couple days, and everyone, both families, we had floated the Frio River one day. And we had done the traditional, you go to a spot, you rent tubes from them, they drive you to a place and drop you in, and they can pick you up later. And we were kind of camped like where they pick us up at. And we did it. We all did it together, fun, a little 2-hour float. Well, the next day, the other dad of the family that was with us, he said, I want to go on a better float. Like I want to go on a little more like a rustic float. And he said, who's in? And no one was, because they were like, no, we just did it. And I said, I'll go with you. And then his daughter said, I'll go with you. So the three of us go. And so family members drive us up to a bridge somewhere along the Frio River, and we jump in, and we don't really know where we're at. We just know we know the river, it goes one direction, right? Like as long as you don't get out, you'll get there. And so we get in, and we know we're going to float towards, we knew we were up above Garner State Park, and we knew that our families were going to be setting up kind of a camp for the day right past Garner. So we're just going to float all the way through. It was, as far as floats go, the greatest float I've ever been on. I mean, like, we had some rapids. There wasn't a lot of people there. There was one spot where there was like a little 2-foot waterfall. It was like God's Six Flags, and you just went off it on your tube. It was awesome. And so, we don't really know how long it is, because when you go to the paid one, they're like, it's a 2-hour float today. Well, we're like, it's just us and the Lord. Like, we don't know how long it's going to be. And so we're like, maybe we should start paddling, and, because, we don't want to be past dark. So we do. We start paddling, we're going. Me, my buddy, his daughter. Well, right before we get to Garner State Park, as the river flows in, my buddy's asleep. He's like in his tube. He's just laid out, like, looking to Jesus in the heavens. And me and the daughter taking turns pulling and, walking. And we get through Garner. We get to the end of the river at Garner State Park, and there's a dam. And you can't go over it. You've got to get out of your tube and go further down. So we go to wake him up, and when we go to wake him up, we discover he's not napping. He's diabetic, and he's in a diabetic drop. His sugar, he didn't take enough sugar with him, like on the float. So we were like, oh, he's just napping. No, he's not. And so if you've ever been with someone who's diabetic, when they have like a low sugar, it's kind of like, you're talking to a drunk person. So, he fit in great, like there at Garner State Park, like right where we're at. Like, it's like no one even knew. And so, but we knew. And we're like, yeah, okay, something's wrong. Well, so it's in that moment, like it's crisis. We're there, and we're like, we've got a potential medical emergency, and we've got to figure something out. We've got to find sugar, but I've been floating in a river for 4 hours. I don't have my wallet on me. I don't float with a credit card. I don't float with a phone. I have no way to call anybody. And so I'm literally looking at the daughter, and I go, you guys stay right here at the dam. Don't let them go anywhere. And so I'm going up to Garner State Park to a little snack shack, and I'm like negotiating with a 16-year-old who works there during the summer, like, I'm going to need a Dr. Pepper. And he's like, well, I'm going to need $3. I'm like, I don't think you understand. Like, I don't have money. But let me tell you what's happened. I'm trying to tell him quickly, I got a guy, it's a medical emergency. And you can tell the kid's like, is this guy just scamming me for a Dr. Pepper? And he's like, okay, I'll give it to you. So he gives it to me. I go down, hand it, say, get him the Dr. Pepper. I know we're a little bit further down the river. I don't know how far. I'm going to go down river. You guys stay here. We're coming back for you. So I go down the river. I see our campsite, like kind of where we're at for the day. We're not overnight. We're just there for the day. I get there. Everybody's gone. Like our crew's left. I don't know what they were thinking. We just float wherever. I don't know. Who's coming to get us? So there's no one there. Again, kind of crisis mode. I've got a guy that I think is going to be okay. I got no cars, no cell phone. So I've already run down the side of the river, because you can't like swim the river that fast. So I look like a crazy person running down the side of the river. Wait, now I've got to run back past all of the people I just ran by. So I run back to make a plan. They're gone. The dad and the daughter, I don't know where they're at. I'm like looking around, and I'm thinking, I mean, you can't, he didn't drown in waist-high water, right? Like, she didn't take her, but I'm like, nowhere to be seen. So I run back to the campsite again, third time by all these people that are floating, like running like a crazy person. Luckily, as I get to the campsite, some of our crew has pulled up in a car. And I'm like, oh, great, I'm so glad y'all are here. Have you seen our other friends? And they're like, no, we don't know where y'all are at. We finally just gave up on y'all. And I'm like, well, start telling the story. I go, I don't know where they're at. They're gone. So we drive back to Garner State Park. Kind of now, I didn't run for the fourth time by all these people. Oh, no, I take that back. We did. I ran for the fourth time because I said, what if they're walking? I'll run it, y'all drive it. So we get there, nowhere to be seen. Can't find them. So we're like, what do we do next? We get in the car, drive back to the campsite again. No one's there. We're like, we're going to drive to the house. As we're driving to the house, we come up to a stop sign. We're about to turn left, and here comes a car, and it's my buddy driving the car, our friend, the guy that's like been lost. And he pulls up, and he's like, what are y'all doing? Rolls down, literally rolls down, goes, what are y'all doing? We're looking for you, dummy. Like, where have you been? Like, he had gotten a ride with somebody and just headed back to the house. And like, it was like it was chaos, crazy. And now we look back on it and laugh. But in the moment, like, I was thinking through, like, it's somewhat, for some people, that'd be really scary. Like, I was living my best life. Like, I'm like, I mean, this was like, yes, like trying to solve the problem, trying to find the guy. Like, that was just like, I feel like where I thrive. Where do you thrive? Like, because here's the deal. Some of you you'd go, that would be a nightmare. In a moment like that, some people, they just freeze and they can't move forward, right? God's given you different gifts and different personalities, and he's given you different skill sets. He's given you different things that you love and different things that you don't like, different places that you thrive than me. He's given you all different things from the person sitting next to you. You're a unique creation of God. You're different. And nothing revealed that to me more than the COVID pandemic. Like, I almost asked, like, y'all remember? Of course you remember. It was like 4 years ago. Changed the world. But I remember like being in the office, and we're trying to figure out COVID. At the time, I've got 7 or 8 people that are on my team, but I've got 3 people that are direct reports to me. And I remember like going through this. We're trying to figure out, how do we do church? How do we do life? How do we help people in this moment? And I remember, I'd come home and I'd vent to my wife. I was so frustrated. I'm like, my team is like, they're like doing nothing, like my people underneath me. And in my mind, like I'm thinking, are they just like lazy? Like we've got to make decisions. We've got to do things. And I remember like so frustrated. In the midst of that, we did, as a staff, an Enneagram test. And so I took that and kind of learned a little bit about, personalities. I give you about, 9 categories of personality, but I was like, this might be helpful. So what I learned is the 3 guys that are on my team all had the same number. They all kind of had the same basic personality. They were all planners. Like they are, like I use this illustration. Like if I said, hey, we're going to go from Austin to Dallas, all 3 of my team would have been people who went, okay, well, we've got the map, and we're going to go from Austin to Dallas. It's going to take us 2 hours and 45 minutes if we don't hit traffic. If we do hit traffic, we can take the loop and Temple around, because that's where the traffic usually will be. And so we'll take the loop, but if we do that, we won't be able to stop at Bucky, so we'll have to stop at this place. They're going to have the whole thing mapped out, start to finish. I'm a planner. But let's just go to Dallas, right? We'll figure out where to stop along the way. I don't need the plan. We're just going to go. Well, what happened for them in the midst of COVID, as planners, they're trying to plan out ministry. And you remember, like every 2 weeks, we got new rules. So they'd be building this plan, and then we'd get, hey, rules have changed. You've got to do this now. And so they would have to restart the way just God wired them. They'd have to restart their plan. And then 2 weeks later, new plan. Restart the plan. Then 2 weeks later, we've got this plan from the government and the World Health Organization telling us this. We're trying to figure out which one do we actually do. It was just chaos, right? And so I watched, and what I thought was like, oh, this is laziness. They can't do anything. Like it was actually just the way God designed them to be planners. And once I understood that, and once they understood that my personality was like, let's just go and we'll figure it out along the way, we were able to learn from each other and go, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I'll give you one more example. Donald McLaughlin's one of our church members, one of our elders. Donald is a lifesaver for me. Donald's background, his ministry, his background as a lawyer. When we have to get 501c3 stuff as a church so that people's giving's tax deductible, when we have to make policies and things like that, Donald jumps on those things, and like in 24 hours, we have it all done. It's like lawyered up. It's great. And man, we move forward and go. If I had to do that, like I would have just like called a friend and said, can I have y'all's, and deleted out their church name and put in City Church, and somebody went, y'all aren't in Houston. I'm like, oh, I missed that. I don't thrive in that. I don't love that. He's so good at that. Personality, skill sets, we're different. God has created all of us different. But the one thing that's true for all of us is that you and I become the best version of ourselves, the best you, when you're being developed in the quiet place. No matter what your personality is, no matter what your skill set is, you're developed into the best version of you, what God created you to be in the quiet place. And I want you to go to Matthew chapter 6. We're going to look at 2 verses today. If you don't have your Bible, you don't have anything to worry about. We're going to put both verses up on the screen so you'll be able to read along. If you've got your Bible, I'd love you to have it. I read from the New Living Translation here because it's so readable, and we want to encourage people to read their Bible on their own. Because it can be scary, it can be intimidating. But the Bible's not. It's 2 sections. There's an Old Testament and a New Testament. Old Testament, it's simply the story of God and his people, the Israelites, the Jews, that's their other name. And it tells the story from the beginning of time up until Jesus. And so in the Old Testament, it's God's relationship with his people. And there's law in there, there's stories in there, like narrative stories, there's poetry, there's prophecy. But all along the way, it's pointing towards the time when Jesus is going to show up, the Savior. The Jews called him the Messiah. And when Jesus shows up, Old Testament closes, we get the New Testament. First 4 books are Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They're eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, his birth, his death, his resurrection, tells his story. The last half of the New Testament, the rest of it is all letters to churches basically about how do we live out what Jesus taught. So we're in Matthew. It's one of those 4, we call them the Gospels. It's the eyewitness account of Jesus, written by a guy named Matthew. His other name, they called him Levi. He was a tax collector for the Roman government, but he was a Jewish man. And he writes the story of Jesus from a Jewish perspective for Jewish people. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, he records this, something Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth, that's all the reward they'll ever get. So we're going to stop there for a second, 2 verses. Real important thing to see here. Prayer is expected. Prayer is not Christian walk, follow Jesus 3.0. It's not senior level course. It's 101 Christian walk. Prayer is following Jesus elementary. It's one of the first things we need to do. Jesus talks to people in this sermon, and there's actually an assumption that people pray. He doesn't say if you pray. He says in verse 5, and you'll see it again when we get to verse 6, he says when you pray. Like he's understanding that you pray. Now, so I want to say this. In a moment, we'll talk about next steps. How do we apply verse 5 and 6 to our life? But if you don't have a regular prayer life, a regular time where you talk to God, that's your first step. That's the one that you need to take. Now, listen, doesn't mean that you have to have an hour-long prayer life. Doesn't mean that your prayers be 30 minutes. If you grew up going to church, maybe, or went to church with your grandparents, you don't have to pray in the King James Version with thous and these. It's just talking to God. And if you need to talk to God 1 or 2 minutes a day, fantastic. Start there. Like you don't have to feel the burden of, well, I've got to carve out an hour to pray and I don't know how to do it. If your prayer life right now is 0 minutes a day, just take your next step. Your next step, take 2 minutes a day. Just talk to God. If you go, I don't even know what to do, just imagine like if you're driving your car that he's sitting next to you, and just imagine talking to him about where you're headed, what you're about to do, what you're afraid of, what's in front of you for the day. Ask for his wisdom. Don't do it if there's people riding with you. That's weird. But like if you're alone, like just imagine him there. Just talk to him. It doesn't have to be, there's no rules. Just practice talking to God, because Jesus says when you pray, there's an expectation. Then he gives an illustration for people that everyone that Matthew's writing to would have understood. We don't get it because we don't see this happen. He says, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on the streets. Now, the New Testament is written in the Greek language, and we've got it translated into English. Again, I said I use in here New Living Translation because of its readability. But the Greek's a pretty intricate language, and so there are words in the Greek, there might be 3 or 4 different words that describe something that even in English we just have one word for. So a very intricate language. And if we're reading the Greek, we get a little bit more colorful picture of what's happening. We know that 3 times a day, at 9 a.m., at noon, and at 3 p.m., the Jews would stop to pray. That was a part of their religious tradition. That's what they did. They prayed 3 times a day. If you could get to the synagogue, which was like church for them, a lot of people went to the synagogue. But if you didn't, you prayed where you're at. Now, there was also people, just like if we were doing it today, that probably didn't care. And they're going about their day, they're busy, they're not really paying attention. But Jesus introduces us to some people that, again, the people reading this, they go, oh, yeah, we know exactly who you're talking about. Who at those times, 9, noon, and 3, they strategically found themselves someplace where everyone could see them. In fact, that Greek gives us a picture that they were on a wide street, meaning they were, this translates a street corner where a lot of people are at. It wasn't they were headed from the office over to grab some lunch and they were down a back alley. They were intentionally on the wide street where a lot of people would be at this time. And it says they were standing. The Greek word is this picture of they had found a spot and they were there for the long run. Like they were purposefully in a location that when it came time to pray, they could put on a show for everyone around. Everyone around could see how well they prayed, what big words they used. They probably had their hands in the air. Again, nothing wrong with putting hands in the air, but it's about motive. And so Jesus says, don't be like the hypocrites who stand in the wide spaces and they get there a little bit early so they can make sure when that hour comes, everyone sees them. He says, don't do that. Now, it's not about public prayer. Jesus isn't forbidding public prayer. It's motive. In the same passages, he talks about giving and he talks about fasting. And in both of those instances, he says, hey, you do those privately. Don't let one hand know what the other hand's doing when you're giving. Fasting, don't tell everybody. But it wasn't that those things have to be private. It was just that they should be personal. In fact, we know that they don't have to be private because in the same sermon, just a few verses before, in Matthew 5:16, I won't have it up on the screen. Let me just read it to you. Jesus said this. In the same way, let your good deeds, the good things that you do, shine out for all to see so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. It's motive. Jesus says, hey, let people see your good deeds. Let people see what you do as long as it's bringing glory to God. But if what you're doing, you're giving, you're praying, you're fasting, is about bringing glory to yourself, that's wrong. And so it's about motive. He says, hey, don't do it publicly. And then he says this in verse 6, and this is where we begin to see where this power of God's conforming you or transforming you into the best you ever comes in verse 6. He says, but when you pray, there it is again, the expectation. But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father who sees everything will reward you. Now he says, your Father sees everything is going to reward you. In verse 5, he says, I tell you the truth, if you're praying out loud for everybody to see, that's all the reward that you're ever going to get. In both these verses, here's what we learn. You're getting a reward. You just get to choose where it comes from. Like you get a reward for your spiritual life. But if your spiritual life is about other people seeing me, if your spiritual life is about the public persona of who I am, if your spiritual life is, hey, I act this way at this place because it matters socially, but over here I may not, Jesus says your reward's going to come from the people around you. Like people are going to applaud you. Hey, great, you pray so great. That's a shallow reward. But if you want a reward that comes from God himself, he says, you go into the private chamber is what the word says there. It had been a place in a home, like a closet, that you could go into, and you close the door, and it's you and God, personally, intimacy, depth of relationship, where you're going, God, I want time with you. And Jesus says, in that moment, when you're in that prayer closet, when you're in that private space, and it's you and God, and it's not about you and everybody else, it's about you pursuing God, that reward is going to be the reward you want. That reward looks like knowing God intimately, like knowing the Father. That reward is answered prayer in your life. That reward, as you are seeking after God, listen, spiritual depth, intimacy, really isn't hard to accomplish. It just takes a little discipline. It takes some time. It takes some saying no to all the other things that the world's calling you to say yes to time with God. And as you begin to stack up time with God, your spiritual depth grows, your spiritual intimacy begins to take off, but it's found in the quiet place. It's found in that private chamber. It's found in that prayer closet. You and God carving out time, and in that, you begin to know Him better. You begin to understand who you are and who He created you to be. And you begin to discover things about yourself, your gifts, and where you fit in the master plan. You begin to discover your purpose. And when you know your purpose and you know God, everything else in life that seems like it's important, that we've been running 100 miles an hour to chase, all kind of just fade away. That's the reward. And God begins to show you your purpose and where you fit and the things that you need to do to take your next steps with Him that grow you to a place that really does unlock the best version of you. But if your spiritual life is all about show, that's all you get. That's your reward. But the deepest reward is in knowing God, because that's where the Creator begins to reveal to you why and how He created you. There's an old race car driver named Darrell Waltrip. I think NASCAR. I'm not really a race car person, but really doesn't matter. I don't know why I brought that up. He was a race car driver. That's the point. But he tells the story. He says, like, when he's driving the car, he said, I'm in that car so much, and I am tuned in that car. He said, I hear things and I see things in that car that no one else sees. He said, there's actually smells that I can smell something and know there's a problem that you wouldn't smell if you were there. He said, I've driven those cars before and I hear something in the engine. He said, I would pull into the pit crew and I'd tell them, hey, something's wrong. He said, occasionally I'd have a pit crew. They would open up the hood and they'd be like, nope, you're all good. And he's like, no, I'm telling you something's wrong. And they're like, no, it's fine. And they'd send him on the racetrack, engine blow up, cause a crash, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of repair. And he said, I knew it. I could tell. He said at other times, though, he'd pull in, he'd go, hey, there's something wrong. I can tell it. I can feel it. I can hear it. They'd pop the hood, and they'd be like, no, it looks good. And he'd go, I'm telling you, there's something wrong. And they'd pull that engine out that looked perfectly good, and they'd come back later and go, you know what, you're right. One of the pistons was scuffing. Like, we had a problem. We couldn't see it till we got into it. It was all of that time in that race car that allowed him to hear things and see things that the average person wouldn't. And it's the same picture of our time in with Jesus. In that prayer closet, the more time we're with Him, the more time our intimacy grows with Him, we begin to hear the voice of God that we wouldn't hear if we're just like everyone else running 100 miles an hour. And we're just going fast and doing this and furious. It's in the moments where we stop, as we said in week 1, just stop. Psalm 46:10, be still and know them. Just stop. Last week, Jesus got away to the lonely places, the wilderness, the mountainside, to get away from the race to be with His Father. And today we see Jesus says, hey, you've got to get into the private chamber because your relationship with God is going to thrive and grow. The reward you want and you seek is found in that secret, quiet place. And God is going to develop the very best you out of that. You'll never reach it if you're going 100 miles an hour and everything's for show. Just like that race car driver hears things, you'll hear the voice of God in ways that you never would have. So what do we do? Like next steps, every time we open up this Bible, we want to be able to read the passages and we want some ideas. Hey, what do I do? Because if Sunday doesn't impact Monday, then I probably wasted your time. Like, maybe you came and worshiped. That's worth it for sure. But anytime we open the Bible, we don't just want Bible knowledge. We want the Word of God to transform us and change us. So I want to give you just a couple things to think through that are kind of applicable. One is this. You need to be able to name the time and place of your quiet place. Like intentional. Like, this is where I go and this is when I go. If you can't name it, it's probably not happening. Like if you're just, I'll carve out some time. Let's just be honest. We're not. We're too busy. You got to have that time and that place. Do you have to? Do you have to have a time and a place to grow spiritually? No, you don't have to. But does it help? Absolutely. Here's an example. Man and I are going tomorrow to Seattle to celebrate our 25th anniversary. We're going to get away for a little bit. We'll be back Sunday. We'll see you, but we won't. We're going to be seeing the Great Pacific Northwest the next couple weeks. We try to do that, not couple weeks, couple days. We try to do that about this time every year, just kind of get away and go someplace. Sometimes it's not Seattle. One year, we did the Greater Central Texas Metroplex. We went to Crawford, Texas. I don't know if you've been to Crawford, Texas. We went to the Indian petroglyphs down in this river canyon. And then we went and drove to George W. Bush's house. Well, we drove to the gate that you get shot at if you go past. But we went to the gate, and we're like, he lives somewhere over there. We went and drove by Chip and JoJo's house to see like where they live. Then we went to Clifton, Texas, and we stayed overnight in this little hotel that was, it was an old jail is what it was, and now it's a one-room hotel. It was such a cool place. We got up the next morning, and we went and hiked Lake Meridian. And then the next day, we went to the big city, the greater Hyco-Hamilton Metroplex. We went to Hyco, Texas, stayed in a cool hotel there. And then, like one of the greatest moments of my life, we drove to Hamilton, Texas, and I saw what could or could not be the grave of Billy the Kid. I love Billy the Kid. I haven't told y'all that. I love the story. That's if you want the 3-hour conversation of he's buried in Hamilton, New Mexico, we can talk afterwards. Early service, somebody came to me and said, I didn't hear the rest of the sermon ever said Billy the Kid because I started Googling, trying to find out what you were talking about. Some people think Billy the Kid was buried in Hamilton. Some people think New Mexico. I love the story. We went and visited. Then we finished our trip in Evant at a drive-through safari. Why did we do all those things? Because all of our friends were like, you got to go to Hyco. No. We just needed time away just for us. We did those things. They were just kind of the fun things to do together. But the important thing was the time away. So I'll ask the question again that I did a minute ago. Do we have to have one-on-one time to go away someplace to stay married? No. Is it absolutely helpful? Yes. Do you have to have a quiet place and a quiet time to find to grow your spiritual life? No. Is it absolutely helpful? Yes. What is your time? What is your place? You set your rhythms. Maybe your time is once a month. Maybe that's what you've got now. If you were at 0 times a month and you can move to 1 time a month where you step in a quiet place, do that. Don't put unnecessary burdens on yourself of, well, I guess I got to spend an hour every day and I got to retransform this closet. Kids, you can't put your clothes in here anymore. It's going to be Dad's prayer closet. And I'm going to be in here from 7 to 8 every night. You just do what you need to take the next step, right? That's okay. Here's the second thing, though. You've got to ask this question, and you've got to answer it. Is your spiritual life about intimacy and depth with Jesus, or is it about other people? That's the question Jesus is asking here. Like, is your prayer life about other people seeing you? Is your spiritual life what we go to church because that's what we're supposed to do, and some of our friends go there? Or is it intimacy and depth with Jesus? Is there something of significance? Lots of times, see this a lot. And this is not a bad thing. Don't hear me saying this, but young parents, they have a child, and having that child drives them back to church because they want their kid raised in the church, because they want their kids to be moral. They want their kids to be good kids. They don't want to be in prison and gangs. So like, we'll take them to church and kids ministry and youth ministry, and we'll do all that. Noble, not a bad thing. But it's not the best. The best is to be a parent who has a vibrant, intimate, deep relationship with Jesus that's yours. A kid who comes to church for 18 years of their life, and then all they see at home is mom and dad chasing the world. They don't see Jesus in their parents' life. They've never seen their parents open a Bible. They've never had a faith conversation with their parents. The only spiritual life they have is on a Sunday morning. Here's what generally happens. Not always, because sometimes the Spirit of God shows up and does incredible things in the life of that teenager. But a lot of times, those kids look at their parents and they go, we've been coming here for 18 years every Sunday morning, and your life is no different, mom and dad's, than anybody else's. So why am I going to do this when I become an adult? Why am I getting up at 9 o'clock in the morning to get ready? I could be sleeping in. I could be going to the lake because we did this as a family, and yeah, it's tradition, but I don't see any change. You want to change the lives of your kids and grandkids? Let your kids and grandkids hear what God is teaching you inside that prayer closet. Have your kids and grandkids see you reading God's word and then having faith conversations. Let them see how God is moving in your life. And what happens is the church experience becomes just a place where we plant, where God does things that transforms my parents Monday through Saturday. And I see the reward that they're living. I see the knowledge of God that they have. I see that God has defined their purpose, and my parents are living on a mission, and my parents' life is different than other people's. There's this spiritual component to it that makes my parents different, and I want that. That's what every parent who brings their kids to church when their kid wants. But in reality, you've got to get into the private place, the private chamber, the quiet place to grow your relationship with Jesus so that it can be flowed out onto your kids. That's where the reward is. It's you understanding who God has created you to be and becoming the best version of you, the best parent for your kids spiritually. We lived in a day and age some time ago, maybe still today, where people went to church because it was the thing to do. It was a business thing. You went to this church or that church because this is how you did business. Jesus says, hey, if your spiritual life is about that, it's about other people, it's about your business, that's your reward. Yep, you're going to get a couple extra clients because of the church you went to, but that's your reward. But the reward you're going to miss out on is your purpose, knowledge, and intimacy with me, and that reward is so much better. But it's found in the quiet place, in the private closet, where God unlocks the best version of you through your relationship with him. Here's the third idea. Like, know those places, be able to answer, hey, the real self-reflection. Is my spiritual walk mine, or is it just something I do? Is it just show? Here's the third thing. If you're trying to figure out what to do, get a quiet place, take Psalm 62:5. We gave you a verse last week, actually 2 verses. Maybe you can meditate on. Just give this to you if you go, I tried to pray, Brett, but really like my prayer life literally is like 3 minutes because I start praying for things and my brain goes crazy and I start chasing other things. Understandable. So try this if that's you. Here's Psalm 62:5. It says, let all that I am wait quietly before God, for my hope is in him. You're going to carve out 5-10 minutes this week in a quiet place, that intentional time, intentional place. Just take that verse. There's your to-do. Take Psalm 62:5 and just read it over and over. Read it slowly. Meditate on it. Pray. Ask, what does this word mean in this sense? And just really dive into just that one verse. That's something that you can do to take a next step into the discipline of having that quiet place. And as you begin to stack those things up on top of each other, your spiritual life begins to take off, begins to grow. And all of a sudden, you're not praying for 2 minutes, you're praying for 5 minutes. And the next thing you know, your prayer closet time that you went in going, man, I've been doing 5 minutes, I'm doing pretty good. And you walk out and it's been 15 minutes later because that relationship with God has begun to grow. And in that, God begins to make the best version, the version of you he created. Get into the prayer closet. Close with a story. I love this story. It's from days gone by, and I don't even know if it's a real story, if it's kind of one of those country legend stories. But it's back in the day where they had ice houses, back before you had refrigerators, freezers. And an ice house was a giant building that had super thick walls, had no windows, had a door that was fit really tight. And so what would happen during the cold times of the year, people would go out when the river or the lake froze over, they'd cut chunks of ice out, and they would bring it into the ice house, and they'd store it. And they would pack the ice house with ice and sawdust, put sawdust all over the place to help as insulation. And they'd seal that ice house up, thick walls, insulation, no windows. And many times that ice would last even into the summer, and they could use it. Well, the story goes to some guys, they've been carving out the ice, and they're putting it in the ice house. And along the way, one of the gentlemen who's working loses his watch, drops in the ice house. Again, no windows. It's dark in there. And the men are they're looking around, kicking through the sawdust, trying to find this watch that was dropped. They give up. Can't find it. They leave. There's a young kid that had heard all that was going on. And as the older guys left, the young kid went into the ice house, closed the door. And about 5-10 minutes later, he comes out with a watch. And all the older guys, they're like impressed. They're like, how'd you find it? Like, we were looking for it. How'd you go in and find it? And the young boy looked at the older men and he said, well, I just went in and closed the door behind me where it's pitch black. And I laid down in the sawdust and I was just quiet. And after a few minutes, I could hear the ticking of the watch. And I was able to find where it was at by its ticking. And I grabbed it. See, the other guys, such a rush, trying to find the watch, noble thing. I mean, they need it. but moving. But it wasn't until somebody went in and was just quiet that they were to hear the solution to the problem. There's your picture of the quiet place. All of those things that you've been wrestling with God about, those things that you've been praying, those things you've been asking. I'm not saying you're going to get the answer tomorrow, but I'll tell you this, you're more likely to get the answer if you intentionally go in that quiet place and you just stop. And you just know that he's God. You spend some time talking to him, listening, and being still. If nothing else, it's a spiritual discipline that results in reward that unlocks the best version of you because it's time with the Father. And you learn things about yourself and are called to do things and discover purpose that you never find when you're going 100 miles an hour. In 3 weeks, we've been talking about the quiet place. We'll close next week. The last week we talked about it, maybe for a while. If you haven't started that practice, just try it out. Try it out this week. Just find that place, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and just experience it. Would you pray with me? If you came in this morning, you don't have a relationship with Jesus, let me tell you that the quiet place is about a relationship with him, but you got to have the relationship with him. You've got to start it somewhere. And maybe you start it today. Following Jesus is hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard. There's a spiritual war going on. There's an enemy, the devil, and he wants to keep you from following Jesus. He does not want you to experience the reward of God. He doesn't want you to have heaven. He doesn't want you to have intimacy with God. He doesn't want you to know your purpose. He doesn't want you to live your purpose. He wants you to keep chasing worldly things and miss out on God's best. That's what he wants, and it's awful. But Jesus wants you so badly. So badly, he went to the cross for you. He gave his life so that your sin could be forgiven, and he invites you to come follow him. And if you want to follow him, I just want you to pray with me. Not special words, just your heart. It's about your motive. You say, God, I'm a sinner. I've made mistakes. And just say, Jesus, I believe that you are God. I believe that you died on the cross. You were raised from the dead. You say, Jesus, I want you to come be boss of my life. That's key. Boss of your life. If you prayed that prayer, your next step, your literal next step, if you pray that prayer, is there's a half sheet of paper that you grabbed when you walked in. There's a phone number on it. It's got a little image of a phone. All you do is you pull out your phone right now. This is your next step. If you prayed that prayer, you text the word Jesus to that number. In the next week or so, we're gonna grab coffee. We're gonna talk about, hey, here's the beautiful journey that God has for you. And we're gonna step into the church and help you discover that so that you can live the life that God created you for. If you came in this morning and you're a believer, you know what your next step is. Find a quiet place. Practice the spiritual discipline of solitude. Practice the spiritual discipline of silence, even if it's for 5 minutes. Start small. It's okay. Just start. And trust God to grow you to the next place you need to be. Lord, there's something therapeutic of even in this moment where the music has slowed down and the lights have dimmed and we almost have a tangible feel of quiet. God, I just pray that you'd call us deeper into that. That we would follow your lead of getting away to lonely places, of coming into that closet, that private chamber to spend time with the Father. And Lord, I pray that when we do, that we would experience that reward you talk about. Life-changing reward. If you need to talk to somebody, I mentioned Donald. I'm going to ask Donald to come down. He's here. Donald's going to be right here, down here towards my left. If you're a lady, you want to talk to a lady, Amanda, my wife's going to be right down here on the right. If you need to talk to somebody while we sing, come talk. If you need to do business with God, if you don't need to sing, if you need to pull out your calendar and lock down a quiet time in a quiet place while we sing, you do that. We just want you to respond to God in whatever way you can in this moment. Let's stand, let's sing, respond to God however you need to.